payment history, the most significant element, accounts for 35 to 40% of your credit score. Always pay bills on time, setting up automatic payments to avoid late fees. If you miss a payment, address it promptly. Credit utilization, making up 20 to 30% of your score, reflects how much of your available credit you use. Keep utilization below 30% by maintaining low balances and paying off credit cards regularly. Multiple payments throughout the month can help keep balances low. Credit mix, comprising about 10% of your score, shows your ability to manage various types of credit. The length of your credit history, contributing 15%, depends on the age of your accounts. Keep older accounts open to build a longer credit history. New credit inquiries and accounts, making up about 10%, should be minimized. Apply for new credit sparingly and manage inquiries to avoid lowering your score. By focusing on these factors, you can enhance your credit score and access better financial opportunities. Gerri, what are the top strategies you recommend for improving a credit score?
Well, one thing I want to point out, and this is a question I get all the time, is credit score fluctuations are normal. Vantage Score says that a 20-point credit score fluctuation is not statistically significant. So I'll hear from someone who says, and this just happened with a friend, where she paid off a loan, her credit score dropped. She said, why did my credit score drop? Because I paid off this loan. I said, wait to see what happens next month. And next month, it just normalized. So things like an inquiry, I don't want anyone to think I should never open a new credit account because of inquiries. If you are otherwise doing fine with your credit, that you'll have a little bit of a drop and then it will normalize. So understand that your credit score will move even if you're doing all things right, but you do have to keep track of it. So that's where I do encourage everyone to use a credit monitoring service. Make sure that you're keeping track of it. I myself was a victim of both personal and business identity theft during the pandemic. So, and if I hadn't been monitoring my credit, I wouldn't have caught it right away. So make sure that you're checking your credit score, but don't freak out about little changes in your credit scores because unless there's something that isn't right on your credit report, then it's probably just normal fluctuations.
Oh, wow. Great advice. Matt, any strategies that you see being most effective in improving credit scores quickly for those in need of a boost?
Well, there are a few things, and one of the best things that you can do, and this obviously isn't available to everybody, but if there are mistakes on your credit report that are holding your score down unnecessarily, going and looking and finding those and getting them changed can really make a difference with your credit. That can be a really significant thing. Another thing that people can do, specifically if you're talking about credit cards, is to improve your credit utilization. So your credit utilization is how much debt you have compared to how much available credit you have. So if you have $3,000 in debt and $10,000 in available credit, your utilization is about 30%. And generally the conventional wisdom for years has been that you want to keep it below 30%. But the truth is, the closer that number gets to zero, the better you are. And obviously the best way to improve your utilization rate is to knock down those balances and get them as close to zero as possible. But we all know that can be a struggle. But it is important to understand that you can also affect the other side of the equation as well with available credit. And you can do that either by applying for a new card, for example. But again, you have to be kind of mindful of the kind of danger that can come with that. But you can also, especially if you have good credit, you can call your current credit card issuer and ask them for a higher credit limit. And LendingTree just did a survey where we found that I think the number is something like 75-80% of people who asked for a higher credit limit were granted one. And I talk about that in my book as well, how to make those sort of requests. And that's obviously the kind of thing that you have to be careful of. If you just see that higher credit limit as a reason to go spend, then you're shooting yourself in the foot. But if you can boost up that available credit while keeping your current debt the same or lowering it, that can have a real impact on your credit score.
Thank you. Leslie, you mentioned that when somebody finds themselves really in trouble, that the credit score is no longer the priority. How do you counsel clients who have made financial mistakes, but maybe they're hesitant to seek professional help?
So first, we try to provide the most supportive and non-judgmental environment. I mean, I've been resolving debt for over 25 years, and I've seen almost every possible scenario related to debt, and I've counseled thousands and thousands of people over the years. So, just by really being understanding and encouraging people to seek some assistance, is empowering in and of itself. That, while they saw a problem and they took a position to help themselves, I think is a very a position of strength, not a position of weakness. So to me, sometimes it doesn't really matter how they got into debt. It could have been divorce, it could have been bad financial decisions, whatever it is. And there is an air of embarrassment. I would say the common denominator for emotions for clients is embarrassment and shame, sometimes anger, frustration, and all of that, has to be considered, when we're looking at resolving debt. And because resolving debt is not an overnight process, there is no quick fix to fixing debt. It does take a little bit of time. It actually changes habits and it creates better habits. And by offering clients kind of an open door policy that we do, where we don't hourly bill or discourage calls, we actually encourage it. We allow clients to call us with decision making. Buy now, pay later. Does that make sense for them? Does it make sense to apply for new credit? Where should they apply? How should they apply? What are better ways to build the credit back up, and the best ways to manage credit and debt along the way. So we're counseling clients on a regular basis who seek assistance in resolving debt the best possible way, and encouraging them to be open about the process, fluid about the changes, and be able to understand that, listen, you know what, many people come to me and they say, for 30 years, I always had great credit. I was always able to pay my bills. I've never been in this position. And you know what, that's a great history to be proud of. And that credit scoring model is meaningful under certain circumstances, but other times it actually isn't. At times when we're looking at clients' credit and debt, and we're looking to resolve the debt, and in terms of the credit, and they're feeling badly about the fact that their credit score has come down, we talk to them about what's happening financially. Is the credit score meaningful today, tomorrow, in the next couple of years while we're resolving the debt? And if it's not, and we can hold it off, then we can talk about ways in which we can build that credit back up, put them in a more positive position, create more cash flow, and manage and limit the exposure to debt going forward, and helping the client really make good decisions. And I think that's what differentiates me, certainly from other attorneys, and certainly from in the debt world, that we have such a supportive environment, and that there is no shame in having debt. We've all discussed debt. I also had very serious student loan debt when I first started my career. And it takes time to build up the credit. It takes time to manage and get rid of debt. And it takes time to have the requisite cash flow and understand your habits and ever-changing lifestyle. That all of that has to be considered when we're counseling and we're managing credit and debt issues.
It's a good point. Breaking bad habits and creating good habits, or building good habits. Lynnette, I wanted to ask you, because you mentioned in calculating the credit score, I think you mentioned that, like, diversity or diversification. What advice do you give to those trying to improve their credit mix? Oh, you're muted again.
I'm sorry. I was making sure that it was muted when my dog is nearby. But one thing I think that people can do to improve the mix of credit that's in their files is to add positive information to their credit reports. So I referenced broadly speaking, the three types of loans that are found on most consumers' credit reports, whether that's a mortgage loan, an installment loan, or a revolving credit obligation, like a credit card. So sometimes somebody might not have a credit card, and just like getting a credit card and then adding that trade line or that information to the credit files will actually improve their credit score. But there are other times when they actually did have a traditional loan, but for whatever reason, maybe it was a small lender, maybe it was on their information and dropped off for some reason. Maybe they had an obligation that is current, but is sort of there's misinformation about it. It might say, oh, you have a $10,000 balance and really your balance is 1,000. So there's one extra zero on there or whatever. Matt talked about looking at the credit reports for errors and making sure that that's accurate. That's absolutely important. I think Consumer Federation of America did a study, and they found that about 70% of all credit reports have mistakes, a significant number of them big enough in terms of those errors to cause somebody to be declined for credit or to have to pay a higher rate for their credit. So I would start there. And also I would say, don't co-sign for other people, because that can, of course, put you at risk and at jeopardy of having a credit issue if that person doesn't pay. Again, ties back to what Leslie was talking about from a legal standpoint. Some people go, well, it was their loan or they charged it or whatever. Yeah, but you're jointly and individually liable for that obligation, whether it's an ex-spouse or a partner or whatever, or someone else. So be super cautious about co-signing for others.
Well, and when you're talking about co-signing, that also goes for making people an authorized user on a card. And because that's such a common thing now. We did it with my son, and the truth is that the only person who is legally liable for what is spent on that card, whether it's spent by the main account holder or the authorized user, is the main account holder. So that may make for an awkward conversation across the dinner table with your kid or whoever you're making the authorized user, but you need to make sure that the person who you're giving access to that card knows full well what the consequences are if they go too crazy and don't pay that balance back, because it's better to have that conversation in advance than when the room's on fire.
I also think you can limit the exposure there. I also have given my young adult children access to authorized user cards, but I'm able to limit their exposure. We also, in my house, since they're very young, given what I do, and sometimes they don't love this, but open discussions about credit and debt and budgeting and financial management are just very normal in my household. I understand from my clients and even from the way I grew up, and certainly my generation, money wasn't really talked about. None of this is an easy and comfortable conversation. And sometimes, one person may feel intimidated or uncomfortable, or, it is often a difficult conversation. But I found that having open and honest discussions about credit and debt is really important. What I do find sometimes, and I actually have a client, unfortunately, that co-signed a student loan for a coworker's child, and that person has since disappeared. And now my client is being sued. And so they're very exposed at this point to the legalities of co-signing something. So while you can control credit cards when you're giving an authorized user, if you allow a co-signing circumstance or situation where you're co-signing for a cousin, a friend, a significant other, in any way, shape, or form, you are on the hook and you definitely can be sued. And we see many of those cases. So be aware as the consumer before you agree and do my client's a nice guy and he was trying to help his coworker out, but in the end, he's responsible. And you know what the creditor said? I don't care about the other guy who's the co-defendant. I care about your client. He's the one who's working and he can be garnished. So the creditor is chomping at the bit to get to my client because he's the income person on it. The other person's currently not working. So be aware of the consequences and the legalities of setting yourself up in those circumstances. On the credit card side, you could limit that. I limit that all the time with the kids.
And just to be clear, I think the ultimate way to limit that, and I have 3 kids, I've done the same thing with mine. They're 26, 24, and 18, added them as authorized users on our credit accounts. But what we do is we get the credit cards delivered here to the house and then put them in the drawer. Like our youngest daughter, she actually does have a credit card with her, but With the others, the way that we handled it is to just keep the credit card. So they're not charging, we're not exposed or anything like that, but it does help them to establish their credit history. One other thing I would say in terms of not having to deal with the student loan issue on the back end. So some things you can kind of mitigate the risk ahead of time, like taking the credit card and putting it in the drawer. But other things, there are options to, under normal circumstances, quote unquote, whatever that is. Let's say you're a parent, your kid went to college, you co-signed for student loans. Now the kid has graduated. He or she has a job, but again, you're still on the hook if they don't pay that student loan. You guys could have whatever private side deal you want, but if they don't pay, you're still going to be on the hook. Well, you can get a release form. Sallie Mae and other lenders offer this. Once the student pays typically around 12 months worth of payments, student loan payments, then they will allow the co-signer to be released from that obligation. There's a form you have to fill out and to try to go about it. But
very rare. Very, very rare. I can tell you from my experience in managing student loans for clients, that is very, very rare that they'll give that release. And it is an option. And I'm glad that you brought it up, but it is an option. Going back to the credit card piece, just to touch on what you said in managing the kids, and helping them build their credit. I do think it's a really great tool. All of these things are great tools. The student loans are great tools for managing and building credit as well. But some of the back end pieces that are out there are sometimes in theory and not necessarily in the reality. So if you go in as a co-signer and you think that your student's going to make 12 months of regular payments and you're going to get released, I wouldn't hang my hat on that as the reason why you're going to go in and co-sign a student loan for somebody.
I think you're muted, Andy.
Andy, you're muted.
There you go.
I don't even have a dog, and I'm muted.
It happens to the best of us.
So if you're tuned in, you're listening to Inspired Money, Mastering Credit, Building a Solid Foundation for Financial Health. We're going to move to Myths and Misconceptions, segment 4.